15 days after my surgery, I came home. My daughter-in-law stood in the doorway and said coldly, "My parents have moved in. You'd better not make them uncomfortable." I just smiled. Enjoy it while you can. 1 week later, the silent counterattack I had planned left them all in shock. I'm glad you're here. Stick around to the end and tell me what city you're watching my story from. I want to know how far it has reached. I was sitting in the taxi, my back aching and my hands trembling as I clutched my old cloth purse. 15 days in the hospital after a hip replacement surgery had left me drained. During those endless days in that sterile white room, all I dreamed of was going back to my house, the place my husband William and I had built with so much effort. But no one came to pick me up. Not a single call, not a word of comfort from Matthew, my son, or from Jessica, my daughter-in-law. I handled the discharge paperwork myself, packed my things and called a cab. My heart was heavy, but I kept telling myself, they're probably just busy. I'm sure they're waiting for me at home. "What's the address, ma'am?" the driver asked in a monotone voice. "Number 14 Magnolia Street." I answered, trying to sound calm. "The White House with the green fence." He just nodded. I looked out the window, watching the familiar streets of Phoenix pass by. Every corner, every tree brought back memories. When William and I used to take Matthew to school, or those afternoons sitting under the rose bush in the garden laughing as a family, William was gone now. It was just Matthew and his little family left. I was hoping for at least a hug or even a small smile. The taxi stopped in front of the house. I saw the gate was ajar, not padlocked like usual. A strange black SUV was parked in the driveway, right where Matthew used to leave my granddaughter Sophia's bike. I had a bad feeling, but I pushed it away, thinking maybe it was just a visitor. I paid the driver. I got out stumbling with my purse in hand. The pain from the surgery still shot through me. Every step felt like lead. I pushed the gate open, crossed the yard, and stood in front of the familiar wooden door. I knocked softly, waiting. The door opened. Matthew was there, tall, with a serious look on his face. His eyes, the same ones that used to look at me with a son's love, now just showed distance. I smiled weakly, trying to hide the pang in my chest. "I'm home, Matthew," I said, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. He didn't move. No smile, no hug. "You can't come in here," he said flatly, as if talking to a stranger. I froze as if I had been slapped. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice trembling, praying I had heard him wrong. I took a step forward, trying to get past him, but Matthew blocked the way. Then I saw Jessica behind him, holding Sophia in her arms. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, like she was evaluating an old piece of furniture. Then she turned her head and shouted with her chin held high, "Dad, Mom, come on out!" From the living room, Robert Davis, Jessica's father, emerged with a glass of wine in his hand, walking as if he owned the place. Behind him came Brenda, her mother with her arms crossed, and a crooked smile that chilled me to the bone. I still didn't understand anything when Jessica spoke, her voice ice cold. "Starting today, my parents live here. You'd better not make them uncomfortable. From now on, you no longer live in this house." Her words were like a knife straight to my heart. I looked at her with fury, and then I looked over her shoulder into the house. Near the garage, cardboard boxes were stacked. On each one, written in black marker, were the letters GMV, my initials, Grace Marie Villalobos. My things, the memories William and I had collected over a lifetime, thrown outside like trash. I gripped the door handle tightly, fighting not to break down. "This is my house," I said, my voice breaking. "I have put my sweat and tears into building it. You have no right." Brenda stepped forward with a mocking tone. "We've already taken care of everything for you. Your things are outside. Now don't bother us anymore." I looked into her eyes, searching for a shred of humanity, but I only found contempt. Matthew, my son, the boy I had hugged, whose hand I had held on difficult days, was standing there, and he pushed me away from the door, without a word, without a hint of hesitation. Jessica chimed in, her voice cold. "Don't insist. You can't come back here." Sophia, just 3 years old, started crying loudly in her mother's arms. Her cries tore at my soul. I wanted to reach out and hug her to tell her that her grandma was there, that I would never leave her, but Jessica took her inside, slamming the door shut. Matthew looked at me one last time, his eyes empty, and then he turned around. The heavy wooden door closed in my face. The slam echoed as if my entire world had been sealed off. I stood paralyzed on the doorstep, the evening light falling on the boxes piled next to the garage. The sound of the door still reverberated in my head like a hammer shattering what little was left of my heart. Mrs. Peterson, the neighbor who had lived next door for over 20 years, walked by slowly. She stopped, looked at me with pity, as if she wanted to say something, but just shook her head and continued on her way. I wanted to call out to her to ask if she knew anything, but my throat closed up and I couldn't speak. I was just there alone with the boxes containing my entire life tossed out like garbage. I shuffled over to the boxes, fell to my knees, and with trembling hands I opened one. Inside, my clothes were a jumbled mess mixed with family photo frames and small trinkets. A porcelain bowl, a wedding gift from my mother, lay there, its edge chipped. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the crack, and I felt the pain expand in my chest. It wasn't just an object, it was memories. It was the days and nights William and I had shared, building our life. I hugged the bowl to my chest as tears streamed down my face. "Why, Matthew?" I whispered, but only the wind answered. Suddenly, the front door creaked open. I looked up with a glimmer of hope, thinking Matthew had come to his senses, that he would run to hug me, to apologize, to tell me it was all a misunderstanding. But no, he just stood there, his gaze averted, and tossed a stack of papers onto the step. "This is the power of attorney agreement. You signed it yourself," he said in a cold, emotionless voice. "Everything is legal, so don't even think about making a scene." With trembling hands, I picked up the papers, fragile yet as heavy as a stone on my chest. My signature was there, clear, the same one I had written hundreds of times. But looking at them closely, I froze as I remembered signing them in the hospital before the surgery when I could barely sit up. Jessica had given them to me, smiling sweetly, and told me they were insurance forms for the hospital to cover the expenses. "Just sign here, Grace. I'll take care of everything," she had said, her voice as sweet as honey, and I believed her. I signed my name without reading a single line because I thought she was my daughter-in-law, that she was family. The paper stated clearly, "Power of attorney granting all assets and finances to Matthew Villalobos and Jessica Davis." The house on Magnolia Street, the money I had saved my whole life, everything William and I had built with so much effort, now belonged to them. I looked up and saw Robert at the door, shrugging, as if it was all obvious. "See, it's all legal," he said in an oily, salesman-like tone. "You have nothing to do with this house anymore." Brenda, Jessica's mother, was behind him, shaking her head with an air of pity, but in her eyes, cold and full of contempt, was the truth. She had no compassion for me. She was mocking me, an old, weak woman betrayed by her own son. I tried to stand firm, but my voice trembled when I asked, "And what about my savings? Without money, how am I supposed to live?" I looked directly at Matthew, hoping that at least he would speak, that he would say something to defend his mother. But Matthew just lowered his head, silent like a shadow. Jessica reappeared without Sophia in her arms, walking confidently, like someone who has won a battle. "You're no longer capable of managing finances," she said, her voice as hard as a knife. "That's why we decided to hold on to that money for the good of the family." The good of the family. That word from her mouth was like another slap. Family to me meant dinners together, Sophia's laughter as I pushed her on the swing in the garden. And what did it mean to her to take everything I had? Robert clapped Matthew on the shoulder, signaling him to close the door. I looked at him, pleading for even a sign, a flicker of regret, anything that would remind me of the son I once loved. But he just bowed his head and pushed the door until it closed. The slam echoed, cutting off the last spark of hope inside me. I hugged the cardboard box tightly, feeling the whole world crashing down. My legs gave out. The pain from the surgery shot through me, but nothing compared to the pain in my heart. I had lost the house, the money, and now my only son. I dragged myself to the corner, the cold evening wind drying the tears on my cheeks. I called a taxi, my voice so hoarse the driver had to ask, "What was that, ma'am? Take me to a small hotel, anyone?" I replied, with no strength left to think. As the car pulled away, I turned to look at the house one last time. The green fence, the wooden door, and the rose bushes in the garden all reduced to a memory. The taxi stopped in front of a small hotel in downtown Phoenix. Neon lights flickered above a dim sign that read, Magnolia Royal. I stumbled out, clutching the cardboard box that held the broken pieces of my life, my legs still shaking from the shock of being kicked out by my own son and his wife. The driver looked at me with a bit of curiosity, but I just nodded in thanks and went on my way. I didn't want anyone to see me cry. I didn't want anyone's pity. I had already lost so much, but my pride was the last thing I had left. At the reception, I got the key to my room, a small room on the 3rd floor. The receptionist, a young man with a kind smile, saw me struggling with my hospital bag and the cardboard box and rushed to help. "Let me get that for you, ma'am," he said, his voice full of enthusiasm. I smiled weakly, feeling a small warmth in my chest from this unexpected kindness in the middle of the storm of my life. When the room door closed, I put the box on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. The small room with its beige-painted walls and a faint smell of disinfectant was a reminder that I was now a stranger in my own life. I opened the box, my hands trembling as I took out what was inside. An old photo appeared, taken at my wedding to William over 30 years ago. His radiant smile, his suit a little big in the shoulders, and my eyes shining with hope for a happy future. The corner of the photo was torn just like my own heart at that moment. I placed the photo on the table, caressed it gently, and whispered, "William, if you were here, what would you do?" But only silence answered. I picked up my cell phone, took a deep breath, and dialed the number of Teresa Ryan, the only friend I still trusted, the one who had promised she would always be by my side, no matter what. "Grace, what's wrong?" Teresa's voice came through warm but full of concern. I could also hear her hurried footsteps, as if she already sensed something was wrong. "Can you come to the Magnolia Royal Hotel Room 128 in the Oakwood District right now?" I said, trying to stay calm. "Don't forget to bring the folder I gave you last year." She didn't ask any more questions, just replied firmly, "I'm on my way." The determination in her voice felt like a spark of light in the darkness. An hour later, Teresa appeared with her old leather briefcase in hand. She walked into the room, set it on the table, unlatched it, and pulled out a bank folder I had entrusted to her last year after William died. "Grace, I had the bank look into this," she said in a firm voice, though her eyes reflected unease. "There were illegal withdrawals while you were in the hospital. Over $200,000 have disappeared. What happened?" I felt a lump in my throat and had to sit down to keep from falling. $200,000. The money William and I had saved our entire lives from the long days of hard work at the sewing shop, the sleepless nights caring for Matthew when he was sick, the times we went without to buy him books. It was all gone. I told her everything, every painful detail, the door slamming in my face, the stacked boxes, and Jessica's cold words saying I was no longer fit to handle my finances. Every word I spoke was like a stab to the heart, but I had to speak. I had to make Teresa understand that I had been betrayed by my own family. Teresa listened without interrupting, but I noticed her hands gripping the edge of the table, her eyes flashing with anger. When I finished, she sat across from me and said with a steady voice, "So they didn't just take the house, they also emptied your accounts. Did Matthew have your bank password?" I nodded, my throat dry. "I asked him to change the password for me periodically, ever since William passed. I thought since he was my son, I could trust him." My voice broke, and the tears started falling again. I had given everything to Matthew because I trusted he would take care of me, just as I had cared for him all those years, and yet he used that trust to steal everything from me. Teresa opened her laptop, typed quickly, and then turned the screen towards me. A list of bank transactions appeared, large sums transferred to a company called Davis Holdings, LLC. "This company is registered under Robert Davis's name," Teresa said, pointing a finger at the screen. "This is no coincidence, Grace. After some digging, I found that the Davis family has been buying up a lot of properties lately, all in your neighborhood." I gripped the edge of the table, my nails digging into the wood. The Magnolia neighborhood where I had lived for over 30 years, where I knew the name of every neighbor, every tree. Those houses weren't just real estate. They were the lives of people like Mrs. Herrera and Mr. Beltran, who had shared joys and sorrows with me for so many years. What had they done to end up in this dirty game? "What do they want?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. "They took my house, my money, and now the whole neighborhood, too." Teresa handed me a bottle of water. Her gaze softened, though it remained firm. "We're not going to let them, but first we need to understand their entire game." The next morning, as the sun came up, I was already in Teresa's car, heading to the county clerk's office downtown. I had barely slept, my mind racing with memories of Matthew, Jessica, and the contemptuous looks from Robert and Brenda. But the pain was starting to give way to determination. I was no longer the weak woman who stood silently at her own front door. I had to fight not just for myself, but also for neighbors like Mrs. Herrera, who were being dragged down by the Davis family's greed. Teresa drove focused on the road, but every so often she gave me an encouraging smile. "We're going to find out the truth today, Grace," she told me firmly. I nodded, clutching the old cloth bag where I kept William's picture as if it were a lucky charm. The office was in an old building with pale yellow walls and the air thick with the smell of old paper and ink. Teresa showed her lawyer's ID, exchanged a few words with an employee she knew, and we were shown into a small room where a thick file was already waiting for us on the table. The clerk, a middle-aged man with round glasses, pushed the file towards us. "These are all the real estate transactions in the Magnolia neighborhood over the last year," he said in a monotone voice. I opened the file. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. Sales contracts appeared one after another, all with Davis Holdings LLC as the buyer. I stopped abruptly when I saw Mrs. Herrera's shaky signature. I remembered her sad eyes the day they threw me out of my house when she mumbled that she would have to move soon. "They tricked her," I said, my voice broken. "Mrs. Herrera would never sell her house if she knew the truth." Teresa tapped her fingers on the table, her gaze sharp. "I did some research online last night," she said. "It looks like they're buying up land because they expect the city to approve a new urban development plan. If it's approved, the value of the land will multiply by 10. Her words were like a lightning bolt cutting through the fog in my head. It wasn't just my house. It was a much larger scheme targeting the entire Magnolia neighborhood. I clenched my fist, my nails digging into my palm. "Then we have to stop them," I replied with more firmness than I expected, "before they make it all legal." On the way back from the office, Teresa's phone rang. She answered with a serious tone. "George, anything new?" On the other end was George Miller, a mid-level official at the Phoenix Urban Development Department who had been in law school with Teresa. "Davis Holdings is applying for a permit to build a shopping mall." George said, his voice low but hurried. "The file is pending approval. If they get it, they'll have total control of the land." Teresa frowned and glanced at me. "Thanks, George. Keep in touch." She hung up and turned to me. "If they get approved, you'll lose any chance of getting anything back, Grace." Her words hit me like a bucket of cold water. I thought I was prepared to face the truth, but the idea of losing the house forever squeezed my heart. That house wasn't just a place to live. It was a sanctuary of memories, with William, with Matthew as a child, with the days we laughed together in the rose garden. I couldn't let them take everything from me. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling but determined. That afternoon we sat in a crowded coffee shop in downtown Phoenix. The aroma of freshly roasted coffee mixed with the buzz of conversations, but I was only focused on Teresa's laptop screen. She displayed a family tree of the Davis family and pointed to each name. "It seems Jessica is the one pulling the strings," she said. "She has a degree in economics. She worked at a large real estate firm before marrying Matthew. Robert and Brenda are just the front. They're on the paperwork, but Jessica is the one designing the whole plan." I fell silent. Her image burned into my mind. I remembered the moment she stood at my door with Sophia in her arms, kicking me out without hesitation, without a hint of remorse. I also remembered when she came to the hospital. She put a stack of documents in front of me and smiled sweetly. "Just sign here, Grace. It's just an insurance request." At that moment, I was so weak I couldn't read. I trusted her and signed. And now I understood. It was a trap planned long before. "She tricked me," I said with a lump in my throat. "I treated her like a daughter." Teresa put a hand on my shoulder. Her gaze was gentle, but firm. "If you agree, I can contact Agent Collins at the FBI," she said. "I know him from a previous case. He's reliable, and I suspect their plan goes beyond just taking your house. But you have to be ready, Grace. Being the main witness is not easy." I looked her straight in the eye, feeling a flame ignite in my chest. "I want everything back," I replied without hesitation. "The house, the assets, and also justice for my neighbors. I'm not going to let them hurt anyone else." Teresa smiled proudly. "Then let's get started." That night I returned to the hotel room, which was starting to feel more familiar. I sat at the table, opened an old notebook, and began to write down every detail I remembered about Matthew, Jessica, Robert, and Brenda. I noted every time they talked about money, every strange look from Jessica when she asked about my accounts, every visit from Robert and Brenda with their air of superiority. I remembered one night months ago when Jessica was at the dining room table checking her phone and muttering with Matthew about a great opportunity. At the time, I thought they were talking about business. Today I understood that was when they began to set the trap for me. When I finished writing, I closed the notebook and took William's photo out of my purse. I lit a small candle and placed it next to his portrait. The flickering light illuminated his kind face, as if he were looking at me, giving me comfort. "If you can see me, please give me strength." I whispered, tears running down my cheeks. I remembered the words he used to say when he was alive. "Grace, you are stronger than you think. Never let anyone break you." I clenched my fist. I took a deep breath. I wasn't going to break. Not today, not ever. The next night, as the faint moonlight streamed through the hotel window, my hands trembled as I held the bracelet Teresa had just given me. It looked like a normal piece of jewelry, but inside it held a tiny microphone so skillfully hidden I had to look closely to even notice it. Teresa stood before me, her expression serious but full of confidence. "Grace, this plan is dangerous," she said gravely. "You're going to go to the house, see if the Davis family lets anything slip. But don't let them suspect a thing. If you sense any risk, press this button." She pointed to a small dot on the bracelet. "The signal will go straight to me and Agent Collins." I nodded, swallowing the lump of fear in my throat. The thought of going back to that house, the place I once called home, now taken over by con artists, made my heart pound. But I had no other choice. I had to find proof. I had to unmask their plan, not just for myself, but for neighbors like Mrs. Herrera, who they were driving to desperation. I put on a loose coat, hid the bracelet under my sleeve, and looked at Teresa. "I'm ready," I said, though inside I wasn't sure I had the courage. Around midnight, I hired an old car from a familiar driver on the corner. I asked him to drop me at the end of Magnolia Street, where the dim light from the street lamps barely illuminated anything. My house appeared in the darkness, the living room still lit, and Robert's black SUV parked in front of the gate like a taunt. I took a deep breath, got out of the car feeling like I was entering a battle I didn't know if I could win. Following Agent Collins's instructions, I went down the alley that led to the backyard, the same way Matthew used to sneak in as a teenager when he forgot his keys. Back then, I'd scold him for being careless, but now that same path was my only way to justice. The back kitchen door was ajar, just enough for me to hear voices from inside. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering in my chest, trying to hold my breath. Inside, Robert was sitting at the dining table with a thick stack of documents in front of him. He spoke with a calculating tone. "Grace's name will give us access to a $250,000 line of credit. With one more forged signature, the bank won't suspect a thing." Brenda beside him raised her wine glass and nodded with a mocking smile. "She's useless now," she said with contempt. "A few more signatures and we'll have everything." My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. I slipped my hand to the bracelet and pressed the record button. A faint click sounded, and I prayed it would capture every word. What they were saying were like daggers to my heart, but they were also the proof I needed. I stood motionless, holding my breath, listening to every sentence. Suddenly, Robert's cell phone rang. He put it on speaker, and Jessica's voice filled the room cold, but with a hint of nervousness. "Dad, Matthew is still hesitating. I told him there's no turning back, but he keeps saying he doesn't want to hurt his mom. I'll handle it." Robert grunted. His hand slammed the table. "He doesn't have a choice, Jessica. Force him. If he betrays us, we'll throw him away, just like we've done with the others." His words froze my blood. Who were the others? How many more people had they destroyed like Mrs. Herrera like me? And Matthew, my son. Were they forcing him, or had he really chosen their side? I wanted to believe he wasn't doing it on purpose, that somewhere inside him a conscience still remained. But the pain inside me didn't allow for much hope. I held my breath. My heart was pounding in my chest, trying to record every word they said. But as I turned to leave, my foot tripped on a small flower pot in the backyard. A crack echoed in the darkness, faint but enough to break the silence. Robert turned sharply. His gaze, as sharp as a knife, slid through the crack in the door. "Who's out there?" he yelled, his voice thick with threat. I panicked. I backed away quickly towards the exit, but my legs, still weak from the surgery, were slower than I wanted. Before I could escape, Robert shot out of the house. His huge hand grabbed my wrist, squeezing so tightly I had to clench my teeth to keep from screaming. "You dared to come back, Grace!" he snarled, his eyes blazing. The smell of alcohol on his breath hit me, making me want to recoil, but he held me tight, giving me no chance to escape. The pain in my wrist was sharp and spreading, as if Robert wanted to crush my bones. He squeezed harder, dragging me into the living room, his eyes burning with menace. "Do you want to die, Grace?" he roared, his voice deep and cutting like a razor. Brenda was behind him, her face pale, the wine glass trembling in her hand, but she didn't intervene. She just watched me like a trapped animal. I gritted my teeth, trying to twist my wrist to press the signal button on the bracelet Teresa had given me. My fingers reached the button, but I didn't know if I had activated it or not. In that moment, all I could do was pray. Pray that Teresa and Agent Collins got the signal before things got worse. Robert raised his hand, ready to strike me. I closed my eyes, bracing for the pain, but just then the sound of a police siren blared in the street, sharp and cutting through the night. Red and blue lights flashed through the window, illuminating Brenda's terrified face. The wine glass slipped from her hands, shattering on the carpet, the red liquid spreading like blood. Robert let go of me, took a step back, his eyes frantically searching for an exit. Before he could react, the door burst open. Agent Collins stormed in, followed by 2 FBI agents, guns drawn, his cold voice echoing. "Don't move! Hands in the air!" I stood there, heart pounding and legs shaking, but no longer from fear. It was relief. They had arrived. The signal had worked. Robert took another step back, raising his hands, though his eyes were still cold, calculating a way out. Brenda shrieked, her voice high-pitched. "What are you doing here? This is our house!" But Collins ignored her. He signaled for an officer to approach and handcuff Robert. The metallic click echoed as the cuffs closed on his wrists, and I felt a huge weight lift from my chest. I pointed to the stack of documents on the dining table. My voice trembled, but it came out clear. "The proof is right there. I have recordings too." An officer approached, carefully collected the documents, and placed them in a security bag. I looked at those papers, remembering the forged signatures the conspiracies hatched in the very house I had built with my own sweat and tears. Each paper was like a stab wound, but now they would become the weapon with which I would reclaim justice. In the midst of the chaos, a figure appeared on the stairs. Matthew, my son, stood there in wrinkled pajamas, his face pale as if he still didn't understand what was happening. He looked at me standing in the living room, and then at his in-laws being led away in handcuffs. His eyes widened in confusion, like a child caught doing something wrong. I stared at him, saying nothing. My heart ached as if it were being torn apart. I wanted to scream, to ask him why he had betrayed me, why he let them kick me out of my own home. But I held back. I stood there with the same coldness he had shown me the day they threw me out. Collins gave the order. "Take them to the car. 2 of you stay and secure the house." 2 officers escorted Robert and Brenda outside, their footsteps mixing with the echo of the sirens. Brenda was still struggling, yelling, "You have no right! We didn't do anything wrong!" But Robert was silent, his gaze lowered, as if he knew his game was over. I stood still, watching them being taken away, feeling like a hurricane had passed, leaving me in a painful calm. Teresa appeared at the front door, walked quickly to me, and put a hand on my shoulder. "Grace, you did great," she said with a warm, proud voice. "From now on, everything will be different." I nodded, though inside I wasn't so sure. I watched the red and blue lights flash in the yard and heard the patrol cars drive away. It was a victory, I knew it, but why did I feel so heavy inside? I had gotten the house back, at least for now. But what about Matthew? My son, who had been everything to me, was just a few feet away, and yet as distant as an ocean. I looked at him again. He was still on the stairs, hands clenched on the railing, his gaze lost somewhere between me and the floor. "Mom." He mumbled, his voice hoarse, but he said nothing more. I wanted to go to him, to hug him like when he was a child, to tell him I loved him despite everything, but I couldn't. The pain of betrayal was too great, like an open wound. I just shook my head and turned away, leaving him there trapped in his own silence. Collins came back and looked at me seriously, though with some compassion. "Mrs. Villalobos, we'll need you to be the main witness," he said. "What you recorded and this file will be key evidence, but I have to warn you, this case might be more complicated than we think." I nodded, my voice firm. "I'm ready. I want them to pay not just for me, but for all the people they hurt." As I left the house, I turned back one last time. The living room where I used to tell Matthew stories, where William would laugh out loud playing cards with his friends, was now just a cold, dark space. I walked through the door. The streetlight illuminated my face, mixing with the tears I couldn't hold back. Teresa took my hand and led me to her car. "You were so brave, Grace," she told me. "William would be proud of you." I didn't answer. I just looked out the window as Magnolia Street disappeared into the darkness. I knew this was just the beginning. The Davis family's network had been partially exposed, but there were still Matthew, Jessica, and other hidden secrets. The next morning, faint light filtered through Teresa's car window, but it couldn't chase away the chill inside me. I sat in silence, clutching the old cloth bag with William's photo, the only thing I had left of those happy days. Teresa drove, glancing at me occasionally with a mix of concern and determination. "Today won't be easy, Grace," she said gravely. "But you've come this far. We're going to finish this." I nodded silently, but inside I knew I couldn't turn back, not after everything I'd been through. We arrived at the FBI field office in Phoenix, a gray building with long hallways echoing with footsteps. Agent Collins was waiting for us in a small room with a map of the Magnolia neighborhood spread across the table. He pointed to the red marks identifying each house already transferred to Davis Holdings, LLC. "They didn't just deceive you, Mrs. Villalobos," Collins said, his voice serious and filled with indignation. "This is an organized fraud ring. They've targeted dozens of people in the neighborhood, preying on their trust and lack of information to steal their homes and land. We need to stop this entire network." I looked at the map. The red marks looked like bleeding wounds on the neighborhood I had once loved. Each mark was a story of family pushed to desperation. I thought of Mrs. Herrera, of her sad expression when she talked about having to move. I thought of Mr. Beltran, the neighbor who used to bring me sweet bread for every holiday. They were all victims, just like me. "I'll help," I said firmly. Collins slid a cooperation agreement towards me. I signed my name. Each stroke was a promise that I wouldn't let them hurt anyone else. In the afternoon, an FBI convoy approached the Magnolia neighborhood silently. I was in Collins's car, my heart pounding as I saw my house appear in the distance. The green iron gate was still there, but it was no longer the entrance to a home, but to the battlefield I had to face. Collins looked at me and spoke gravely. "You will come with us to identify the property and the people inside. If at any point you don't feel well, just say so." I nodded, trying to stay calm, though I knew I was about to face the most painful part, watching Matthew and Jessica get arrested. When the car stopped, I saw Matthew on the porch biting his nails nervously. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken as if he hadn't slept in days. Looking at him, my heart clenched. He was the son I had raised, the one I had loved more than myself. But he was also the one who stood silently when they kicked me out of the house. The one who said nothing when Jessica declared I no longer belonged there. I wanted to run to him to ask him why, but I held myself back, forcing myself to stand tall, not letting emotion overcome me. The front door flew open. Jessica came out carrying Sophia in her arms with the same confident expression as always. But when she saw me sitting in the car with the police, that confidence crumbled. Her eyes widened in surprise, then blazed with fury. "What the hell are you doing here, Grace?" she screamed, her shrill voice echoing across the yard. "How dare you betray the family?" That word from her mouth drew a bitter laugh from me. Family. A family doesn't kick a mother-in-law out of her house, doesn't steal everything she has. I got out of the car, straightened my back, and looked her straight in the eye. Family ceased to exist for me the moment you slammed the door in my face that day. I said, my voice calm but sharp. My words were like a knife. I saw her step back, clutching Sophia tighter. Collins gave a signal, and 2 agents moved to restrain Jessica. She struggled, screaming, "You have no right, I'm a mother!" But the click of the handcuffs cut her off. The neighbors began to gather around the house. Murmurs and pointing grew into a chaotic buzz. "Sophia," my little girl cried inconsolably as she was separated from her mother. A female officer gently took her and led her to another car, heading to Child Protective Services. Her cries tore my soul apart. I wanted to run to hug her, to promise I would protect her. But I couldn't. Not in that moment. I stood still, watching her tiny figure disappear behind the car door. Matthew was still there on the porch steps like a stone statue. His gaze was lost, shifting between me and the police. When one of them approached and put handcuffs on him, I saw his shoulders tremble, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. I felt my heart tear. This was the son I had given birth to, the one I had hugged, for whom I had sacrificed my entire life. And now he was there, handcuffed like a criminal, and I could do nothing to change it. I turned away, not wanting him to see my tears, not wanting him to know that despite everything I still loved him. The crowd of neighbors grew larger. The murmurs grew louder. Mrs. Herrera approached me, her trembling hands taking mine. "Thank you, Grace," she whispered, her eyes full of tears. "You did what we didn't dare to do. You saved the whole neighborhood." I just nodded, unable to speak, a lump in my throat. I looked around and saw familiar faces, Mr. Beltran, Mrs. Elena, the people who had lived beside me for so many years. They all looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. They knew what I had lost to get to this day. I got into the car with Collins, my heart still pounding as the siren echoed down Magnolia Street. Half an hour later, I was sitting in a cold room at the FBI headquarters in Phoenix. Agent Collins stood in front of the desk and dropped a thick folder. The sharp thud made me jump. "We found this in Robert's safe," he said, his voice grave, but edged with anger. I looked down, opened the folder with trembling hands, and felt my heart stop when I recognized copies of my medical records. Every day I had spent in intensive care. Every prescribed medication. Every doctor's note. It was all there, recorded precisely like a diary of my days battling pain and fragility. "How did they get this?" I asked, my voice breaking, feeling like someone was squeezing my throat. Collins pushed another stack of papers towards me, his gaze stern. "We have evidence that Nurse Sarah Miller, who attended to you during your recovery, received money from Jessica," he said. "She intentionally altered your medication doses, causing a minor infection to keep you hospitalized longer." His words were like an explosion in my head. I felt dizzy. I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing. The memories of those days in the hospital came flooding back. The time Sarah would come and give me an injection without looking me in the eye, always in a hurry, as if she wanted to escape. I had thought she was just busy, but she was actually part of the plot. I turned the pages, my heart racing, until I found a life insurance policy. The beneficiary change was dated 6 months ago, and the beneficiary was Matthew Villalobos, my son. My signature was clearly on the document, but the crooked, shaky handwriting wasn't my usual script. "That's not my signature," I whispered, my voice choked. I looked at Collins, hoping he would say it was a mistake, but he just nodded with compassion in his eyes. "We suspect this signature was forged," he said, "and this is no longer just a property matter." Teresa, sitting beside me, slammed her hand on the table, making the papers jump. "This isn't just theft anymore," she said with rage. "This is a murder plot to collect on an insurance policy." Her words were like a knife through my chest. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe, but the image of Matthew came back to my mind, his lost look when they handcuffed him, his gaunt face as if carrying an unbearable weight. Could he have known about this plan? Is it possible that my own son, the son I loved my whole life, was involved in such a heinous conspiracy? Collins nodded, his voice grave but firm. "We will open a new criminal file, and Matthew will also be investigated." I sat motionless, feeling the entire world collapsing beneath me. Matthew, the son who once held my hand crying inconsolably when he was bullied at school, the one who laughed out loud when I baked him a birthday cake, was now being investigated for a plot that could have ended my life. I wanted to scream, to run to him, to ask him why, but I just sat there, my face in my hands as silent tears fell. At that moment, a police officer entered hurriedly, his voice urgent. "We just arrested Sarah Miller at the hospital. She's being interrogated." Collins nodded and looked at me. "Mrs. Villalobos, what you gave us, the recording, the file, has brought us closer to the truth. But I need you to be prepared. This spiral of crimes is deeper than we think." I nodded, though inside I felt like I was sinking into a bottomless pit. Every discovery was a new wound, and I didn't know how many more I could bear. Teresa placed a hand on my shoulder, her voice firm but warm. "Grace, they wanted to turn you into a silent victim, but now you are the one who has unmasked them." I looked into her eyes and saw confidence and determination. She was right. They had tried to push me into the darkness, but I would not stay silent. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath. "I will do whatever is necessary," I said, my voice hoarse but firm. "They have to pay." On the way out of the FBI headquarters, I was in Teresa's car, staring out the window. The streets of Phoenix passed by, but I didn't really see them. In my mind, memories of the hospital swirled. I remembered the days I was bedridden, so weak I couldn't even sit up. I remembered Jessica coming in with flowers and a fake smile, offering words of comfort while she wove a trap behind my back. I remembered Sarah with that evasive look every time she gave me an injection. Everything was planned step by step to take my assets and perhaps my life. A few days after the raid, I was in my hotel room when the phone buzzed. Teresa's voice came through, serious but clear. "Grace, Matthew has been placed in pre-trial detention pending investigation. He wants to see you." Her words tightened my chest. See Matthew. The son who watched me get thrown out of my own home, the same one whose name appeared on a forged life insurance policy, the one I no longer knew if I could trust. I fell silent, gripping the phone tightly, and whispered, "I'll go." That morning I found myself in front of the detention center in Phoenix, a gray building with high walls and a barbed wire fence. The cold wind made me shiver, but it wasn't from the weather. I was terrified to face Matthew, to look him in the eye and find the answer to the question that haunted me. "Why did you do this, son?" But I knew I couldn't run away. I needed to hear him out. I needed to know the truth, however painful it might be. The metal door opened with a sharp creak that echoed down the silent hallway. Matthew was sitting at the table, head down, his hands cuffed in his lap. The gray inmate uniform made him look small, fragile, very different from the tall man who had closed the door in my face that day. I sat across from him, separated only by a worn wooden table. The room was silent, except for the ceiling fan turning with a constant hum as if counting the seconds. I looked at him, waiting. Inside, I was a whirlwind of rage, pain, and a tiny spark of hope that somewhere there was still something left of the son I had loved. Matthew looked up, his eyes red, his voice hoarse. "Mom, I messed up. Forgive me, I'm so sorry." His words were like a dagger in my heart. I wanted to scream, to ask him why he could do that to me, but I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. He lowered his head, his hands trembling in the cuffs. "I'm in debt, Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "I failed on a real estate investment, lost all my money, and then Robert found out. They promised to help me out of debt, on the condition that I took their side." I listened, feeling that each word was a piece of the puzzle I had tried to solve on so many sleepless nights. Matthew recounted, his voice trembling, how Jessica and Robert had manipulated him, taking advantage of his desperation to drag him into their plan. "They said you just needed to sign the power of attorney and everything would be fine," he said, his gaze fixed on the table. "I never thought they would hurt you. I wanted to save my family." I stayed quiet, but inside I was boiling with a mix of rage and pain. Family. The family he was talking about was Jessica and Sophia, or was it me, the mother who had given her whole life for him? I wanted to ask, but Matthew continued, his voice breaking. "I never wanted you to die. I knew nothing about the nurse or the life insurance. They told me to leave it in their hands. If I had known they were planning to hurt you, I never would have agreed." He collapsed onto the table, his tears falling and soaking the wood. His words tore at my soul. I wanted to believe, I wanted to think that Matthew hadn't done it intentionally, that he was just another victim of the Davises. But the wound of betrayal was still there, open bleeding. I remembered his cold gaze at the front door. I remembered his silence when Jessica kicked me out. Could these apologies erase everything I had lost? A soft knock on the glass interrupted my thoughts. Agent Collins appeared, signaling that there were only 5 minutes left. I looked at Matthew, saw him lift his head, his eyes red with remorse. I opened my purse and took out an old, carefully sealed envelope that I had kept since William's death. "Read it," I said, pushing the envelope towards him. "Your father wrote it before he died. He always believed you would do the right thing." Matthew, with trembling hands, opened the envelope and took out a yellowed sheet. I knew every line because I had read it hundreds of times. William had written, "Matthew, my dear son, I know you have a good heart, even if you sometimes lose your way. Life isn't easy, but you will always have your mother who loves you more than anyone, no matter what. Remember that family is the place you return to, the place of forgiveness and love. I trust that you will always choose to do the right thing because you are your mother's son and mine. Be strong and don't let greed or fear cloud your judgment. I will always be with you, even when I'm no longer here." Matthew read, and the tears began to fall on the page, smudging William's words. His voice broke. His shoulders shook as if the letter had awakened something deep inside him. When he looked up, he saw me with eyes full of remorse. "I'm going to confess everything," he said, his voice in pieces. "I'll accept going to prison to pay for my mistakes as long as one day you can forgive me." His words were like a final stab, not to hurt me, but to open a wound that needed to heal. I looked at Matthew and saw in him the shadow of the boy who used to run after me in the garden, who would hug me crying when he fell. But I also saw the man who chose to side with Jessica, who allowed me to be kicked out of the house. I stood up, didn't answer, just nodded slightly. I didn't know if I could ever forgive, but I wanted him to know that I still saw him, my son, even though he had taken the wrong path. Matthew watched me as the police led him away, his eyes full of regret. The metal door closed, and the creak sounded like a final end to our meeting. A month after facing Matthew at the detention center, I sat in the courtroom in Phoenix, my hands gripping the edge of the wooden bench, my gaze fixed on the judge reading the sentence. The light coming through the window highlighted the dust particles floating in the air, as if the entire room was holding its breath. "Jessica Davis," the judge's voice boomed firm and solemn, 20 years in prison for fraud, conspiracy to commit property theft, and attempted murder. I closed my eyes as if a huge stone had been lifted from my chest. Then he continued with Robert Davis, 18 years for directing the fraud ring, Brenda Davis, 15 years for complicity, and finally Sarah Miller, the nurse who tried to deliberately infect me, 8 years for illegal medical practices. When they named Matthew, my heart sank. "Matthew Villalobos," the judge said, 3 to 5 years in prison with a reduced sentence for cooperating as a witness against the Davis family. I bowed my head. Tears fell silently. My son, the son I loved my whole life, now had to pay for his mistakes. But inside me, there was a sense of relief. He had decided to tell the truth. He had chosen to side with justice, even if it was late. When the trial ended, I stood up and left the courtroom feeling that a painful chapter of my life had closed, although the wound remained. Weeks later, after the police had concluded their investigations, I returned to the house on Magnolia Street. The old wooden door had been painted a warm brown, just how William liked it. I pushed the door open and entered the scent of roses from the garden wafting in soft as a greeting. The house was the same, but it was no longer the home it used to be. The walls that had held Matthew's childhood laughter the nights William read the newspaper at the table were now just memories. I stood in the living room, took a deep breath, holding back tears. This was my house. I had gotten it back, but the price had been too high. Teresa arrived one morning with a box of nails and a hammer. "We need to hang the family photos back up, Grace," she said, smiling. I nodded, and together we opened the cardboard box I had brought from the hotel. A photo of Matthew at 5, hugging me tightly in the park with a radiant smile. Another from my wedding day with William, his eyes looking at me with tenderness. We hung each photo on the wall, and with each nail I felt like I was rebuilding a piece of myself. One afternoon I heard a knock at the door. Outside were Mrs. Herrera and the Beltran family with a tray of homemade cinnamon rolls. "Grace, we are so grateful to you," Mrs. Herrera said, her eyes full of tears. "If it weren't for you, this neighborhood would have been lost." Mr. Beltran nodded, took his wife's hand, and added in a deep voice, "You gave us hope back, Grace. You are our hero." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest as if the winter sun had touched me. "I only did what was right," I replied, inviting them in. We sat around the table and shared neighborhood stories like in the old days. A few days later, Elena Gibson, a new neighbor, knocked on the door. "Mrs. Grace, I'm organizing a reading at the university this weekend," she said enthusiastically. "Would you like to come? I think you'll enjoy it." I hesitated for a moment, but Elena's sincere look made me nod. "All right, I'll go." It was the first time I had stepped out of my own confinement, participating in community activities, talking with strangers who nevertheless made me feel alive again. I started getting more involved, from neighborhood meetings to volunteering, as if each step was a way to heal my internal wounds. One day while I was with Teresa at our usual coffee shop, I told her about the idea of creating a legal support fund for elderly victims of financial abuse. "I want to call it the William Villalobos Foundation," I said, my voice trembling, "to honor his memory and so that people like me, like Mrs. Herrera, don't have to fight alone." Teresa took my hand, her eyes shining. "That's a wonderful idea, Grace. I'll help you make it a reality." Months later, the fund was inaugurated in a small ceremony at the community center. I stood in front of the microphone, looking at the familiar faces from the Magnolia neighborhood, and also at new people who had come to support. "No one should have to fight alone," I said, my voice choked but firm. "Justice is not just for me, but for all those who were once stripped of their voice. I lost many things, but I found myself, and I want to help others do the same." Applause filled the room, and I saw Mrs. Herrera wiping away tears, Elena smiling, and Teresa nodding proudly. That night, I sat in the backyard candlelight, flickering next to William's portrait. The soft scent of roses reminded me of the happy days we had shared. I ran my fingers over the photo and whispered, "Thank you for giving me the strength to keep the house and to find myself." Tears streamed down my face, but this time they were not just of pain. They were of liberation, of hope, of knowing that I had done the right thing, that I had survived the storm and become stronger. In that moment, I knew he was smiling at me from somewhere. The story we tell is fictional, but it is based on some real events. The names and places have been changed to protect the identity of those involved. We don't tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to think. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own home? I'm truly curious. If it were you in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace, or would you dare to face it all to get your voice back? I want to know what you think, because every story is a candle that can light someone else's path. God always blesses, and I firmly believe that courage leads us to better days. In the meantime, on the end screen, I'm leaving you two of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until the end.